Today we've got 2 minutes with George Lucas and an intro that could be longer. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, and yes, it's true, we caught up with the writer-director of Star Wars, George Lucas, on the red carpet event for the WGA's event of the 101 best screenplays of all time, as voted on by the members of the WGA East and West. In case you were curious, Star Wars was voted number 68. It is on purpose, timed with the 30th anniversary of Star Wars, that I am posting this podcast a week or two late, because as a 7-year-old kid, I actually did not get to see Star Wars in its initial opening weekend release. I actually had to argue with my parents for about 6 or 7 months, I think, and finally was granted to see it in one of the smaller, dingier theaters in Kansas City at the time when it was almost out of the theaters, but I saw it nonetheless, I tell you, and it's definitely a film that changed my life. I was so upset a year later in the Academy Awards that Star Wars did not win Best Picture, Best Screenplay, and Best Directing, that for a long time I would not even utter the name of that other guy that took those awards. We know him now as Woody Allen, but, well, Annie Hall, I could admit as an adult, is a good movie. It's got some laughs, it's got some nice drama, really well written. Doesn't have the Millennium Falcon. It doesn't have the Death Star. It doesn't have a lightsaber fight. It's kind of hard for that 7-year-old kid in me to still give it props. But I love the film, don't get me wrong. Also, you should look for Creative Screenwriting Magazine's latest issue in any Barnes & Noble and Borders bookshops. And you could find out all about our current issue online at www.creativescreenwriting.com. Some people have written in and asked me about my Darth Vader ring. Yes, it is true. I do wear a sterling silver FAO Schwartz limited edition Darth Vader ring. And I wear it because Star Wars really is one of my favorite movies. It's the movie that made me want to make movies. And furthermore, the movie that made me want to learn about how movies are made. But now, without further ado, let's jump right onto the red carpet at the 101 Best Screenplays of All Time event, where we caught up with George Lucas for a solid 2 minutes.
Mr. Lucas, Jeff Goldsmith, Creative Screenwriting Magazine. Since you're being honored for Star Wars, could you talk about how difficult it was when you started Star Wars? From everything I've read, it wasn't the easiest script for you to write. What kept you going and reopening that drawer to know that you should continue to finish that draft?
Well, I'm very persistent. Once you start something, you never finish. I mean, that is the way it seems. But once you start, you just keep going until you finish. And you just never give up.
How would you say your writing habits have changed between now and then, or have they?
Not at all.
Not at all?
It just takes longer.
just takes longer?
It's longer and it's much harder.
What would you say your writing habit is? How many hours a day would you say you like to write?
I work 8 hours a day. I don't write 8 hours a day. I sit at my desk 8 hours a day.
You sit at your desk 8 hours a day, and when you write, you write?
Well, I usually write 5 pages a day. Sometimes I can do it pretty quick, and sometimes I can't. Inevitably, it always happens in the last hour. You know, hour number 8 is when it all gets written. Everything up to that is trying to figure out how not to write it. I write other things.
There's an old adage that nothing's truly written, things are only rewritten. How important would you say rewriting was when you were writing Star Wars as that original draft?
Well, in anything you write, Francis Coppola, who was my mentor, because I wasn't much of a writer, said, look, the only way you can ever write is to simply go through it, write it as fast as you can, never go back and look at what you've done until you've finished. And so that's the way I write. So I end up with lots and lots of rewrites. But it's the only way to do it. You just go through and, in a few weeks you write a whole draft and it's horrible, and then you start fixing it.
As a director, you have the luxury of directing your own work. Was there anything in particular that you remember as an important rewrite while shooting Star Wars that really saved the day, or was an 11th hour kind of situation that you're proud of as a rewrite?
Well, I killed off Obi-Wan Kenobi.
That was an 11th hour rewrite? That was
beyond 11th hour. We were in the middle of shooting.
Really?
Yeah. Alec Guinness was not very happy about it.
Interesting.
But I had to convince him that it was the best thing for the movie.
We love your script. Thanks for your time.
And how great was that? Thanks again to George Lucas for spending time with us on the red carpet. If you pause it or scroll back a little, you could see exiting with Mr. Lucas was actually Lawrence Kasdan. Mr. Kasdan was joining him that night to be honored as number 42 out of the top 101 screenplays of all time, as voted on by the WGA. for his screenplay of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Of course, as we know, Mr. Kazan co-wrote The Empire Strikes Back, so I would have loved to have asked Mr. Kazan a whole bunch of questions, but that's what happens when you're on the red carpet. It's fast and it's furious. Maybe one of these days we'll get Mr. Kazan into his own podcast. I'd love to. As for what Mr. Lucas was talking about with killing off Obi-Wan Kenobi as a rewrite during production, it's been covered in a few books. A lot of new books have come out this year for the 30th anniversary. I, of course, would always suggest you check out Star Wars, the annotated screenplays, because there's a lot of amazing information in that book. Feel free to email me anytime at yo.goldsmith@gmail.com. I will do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. If you dug this episode or the podcast in general, feel free to throw a virtual tip into our PayPal virtual tip jar. You could do so by visiting www.creativescreenwritingmagazine.blogspot.com and look for the PayPal icon. Of course, if you want to find out what's in the current issue of Creative Screenwriting Magazine, just go to creativescreenwriting.com. Thanks again for clicking the subscribe button in iTunes or your podcatching software. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, thanking you again for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.